All right, we'll get started now. So hopefully, last talk of the day, and hopefully I won't bore you guys too much, and you'll find this entertaining or useful. I was going to name my talk "Leading Without Authority," but then I decided that I wanted to stay positive and think glass half full instead. So I decided to name it "Leading Through Influence." And it's basically snippets of my story as a junior engineer, sort of serving as in a tech lead role, as well as my experiences with other people who I consider to be technical leaders. So a little bit about myself. I have about 3 years of industry experience, so still junior to intermediate level in terms of my growth in my career. Um, I started out as a computer science theory student, and what this means is I spent a lot of time reading papers from the 60s that were often written using typewriters. So I got really good at reading text that was actually slanted because they couldn't adjust it right on the typewriter, I guess. And then I was a data scientist at an innovation lab for a larger enterprise. So there you actually spent a lot of time promoting new technology and getting the enterprise to use new technology. But a lot of this so-called new technology was actually technology that was developed 10 years ago. And I am now a software engineer at a startup called Button, located in New York City. We do summer rooftop happy hours at our office, so if you are interested in hanging out with my startup coworkers, I have cards, so feel free to contact me at the end. And yeah, now I spend a lot of time trying to get fellow engineers and teammates to buy into doing things a little bit differently, hopefully in a way that makes our lives all easier. So in tech, like trying to influence people in terms of influencing people into using new technologies or adopting new processes is super important to your growth as an engineer, but also the level of success that your team can have. So this is why I decided to speak about this topic. So a small overview. I am going to talk about the 7 types of power that I got out of this book on leadership, and the things that stop us as individuals from having that kind of power. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the fears I had when I was working at a large enterprise, and the fears I still have as a relatively junior or mid-level engineer. And I'll tell a little bit about what didn't work very well for me with my team and what did work very well for me. All right, so 7 types of power and their counters. Legitimate power, so this is typically what you think of when you think of authority or power in a workplace. Within leadership, this is when your title is the CEO or your title is the senior manager, and it's power that someone has granted you. But what that means is it's also something that can be taken away, and it's also something that can be abused. So I've seen leaders who would say, I am the boss, therefore what I say goes. And that is the crux of the argument. And even with the title, sometimes people might view you as undeserving of that title, particularly if you are a minority of a woman, per se. So there's also the scenario where if you gave yourself this title, say you're an entrepreneur or a community organizer, then it's also easier for people to say that you don't actually deserve it. So those are kind of the pain points there. And for me, in my time working in an enterprise, it was very much like I didn't have legitimate power because my job title wasn't senior enough. So I don't have the right title to take on these responsibilities. It's probably something that you also felt before. So the another kind of power is coercive power, which if any of you ever had to read *The Prince* by Machiavelli at school, it's there's this notion that as a leader, fear is more powerful than love, and it's leading through fear essentially. And it's harmful in a lot of ways because you're not going to earn respect or loyalty, and it's going to be very short term, and you can't really build credibility using fear. And the general advice here is, as leaders, you should never really use coercive power. And the counter argument to that is, as women, too often we come off as too aggressive. So even if you're not coercing anyone or you're not bullying anyone, there's this common perception that you're still being too aggressive, and you're being accused of using coercive power. So that's definitely a challenge. Expert power is a really good one to have, actually. It's drawing leadership from experience or knowledge. This sometimes comes in the form of, say, if you have a PhD in mathematics, then people see you as an expert in that field, and when you say something about mathematics, people immediately say, oh, like, that must be true, and that there's less of an argument against that. A fun, I guess, story I have on this was last year I had the opportunity to visit CERN, where the Large Hadron Collider is, and work on a pro bono data science project. And one of the physicists there told me that, don't worry, it's not possible for the LHC to cause any kind of explosion on Earth, because every day we are getting hit with particles from space that are way more powerful than any of the ones that the LHC can even dream of producing. And we still haven't exploded yet as a planet, and therefore you don't have to worry about the signs that are happening here. It won't ever blow up. And I was like, okay, that was very reassuring. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're the expert, so I will just take your word for it and not worry too much. The thing about expert power really is that it actually goes a long way in tech, as I found out. So you often see engineers who have decades of experience, and they are oftentimes wonderful engineers to work with. But sometimes you'll often work with technologies that are only 2 years old, and you may not realize it because you think that, oh, I only have 2 years of job experience, I must be less of an expert than this other person. But really, you actually worked with the technology for longer, or you're more familiar with it, and you suddenly become the expert in the room. So that's actually, I found that incredibly empowering. The counter to expert power is imposter syndrome, which I'm sure you guys have heard of a lot and is very well aware of. So fake it until you make it, I guess. But it does become really hard to come to the realization that you're an expert in something and feel comfortable with that, or feel comfortable enough to at least maybe not go up to someone and say, hey, I'm an expert in this, you should listen to me, but at least say, hey, here are my experiences, and you should listen to me about what I've learned on this front. All right. Informational power. Informational power is kind of like when you were in high school and you knew the latest gossip and your friends didn't, and you had the power of deciding who to share that with. It's kind of also uncomfortable, and it means you have information other people don't have. It means that you're not being fully transparent on a team if one person has so much more informational power than others. So it's definitely a red flag, and it's also short term because eventually that gossip gets out or that information gets out, and you lose that power. So typically, you're really not sure what information is powerful, and it's very harmful to the team overall to not share that information. So some things I've noticed are, one, I didn't share that information because I didn't know that it was helpful, so I didn't know it could help the team if everyone had known it, or I didn't know that information. I had information that others had, which is I guess unintentionally leveraging that. But if you're not gaining from the power, you're just not you're just as much at a disadvantage as others. So it's also not a great thing to use in pursuing leadership. Okay, reward power. I don't have much to say about this. I don't have a lot of experience on this front. But reward power is basically, if, as a senior person, you're able to offer a raise or a promotion or some kind of reward to incentivize people. And I think it ties in a lot with the first one on authoritative power or legitimate power, because it also sort of reinforces a sense of legitimacy, whereas as a leader you can say, hey, if you do a good job, I'll get you X. For me, I was just too junior to hand out rewards. I can't really promise anyone a promotion. I can promise them that I will put in a good word for them, but really it's not something that is very helpful. Okay, connection power. Connection power is pretty powerful. It means that you have someone who's willing to advocate for you. So like a senior person who's willing to advocate for you. Something I've heard that is similar to this is the advice that you should have a sponsor as well as a mentor, because a sponsor is someone who will speak on your behalf when you're not in the room and maybe say things like, hey, so-and-so could be a good addition to this project when they're in a planning meeting or something. So that's sort of how I view connection power. That also means that you are well connected in a way that you can influence other people to do things on your behalf. It's not really leveraging your own influence or power, but rather borrowing someone else's. This is also kind of how I see it. And of course, it's kind of hard to obtain because you have to build out that network. So a counter to that is you might not be connected enough with powerful people to be able to leverage that. So this is kind of a comic I pulled off, is that you want to seem cool, that you're connected to celebrities, but sometimes that power isn't as useful if people don't want to buy that you're actually connected in that sense, or it doesn't actually help you. I've also seen people do this in meetings where you have a certain agenda and then you just name drop a VP's name, and as your argument, it's like, oh, this VP said that it was a good idea too. So sometimes it can be very powerful in the situation where, let's say you're a junior person, you're not in the meeting, and a senior person like advocates for you, and sometimes it could be kind of strange. And last but not least, charisma or influence. It's, according to this book on leadership, the most effective form of power, and for sure, it's definitely the most empowering. You can influence those who admire and respect you. It's in theory, less of a hurdle to achieve. You don't need a job title. You don't need to be friends with important people. And it's based off of a lot of positive values, which I like. People respect you for your integrity, for your honesty, and therefore you start to gain influence that way. Of course, it's actually incredibly hard to come by, and it's incredibly hard to build up. And something that I've noticed is it's incredibly hard for introverts to develop that sense of charisma or influence, because I think it's definitely hard for everyone, but I think it's especially hard for introverts. And I know there's a lot of resources out there, but I'd be curious to see, when I was job interviewing, I'd be curious to see, like, I wish there were material out there for how do you network and job interview as an introvert. So that's what I was thinking, and this is, as introverts tend to be the wallflowers, the people who are on the side sometimes, but it is really important to build out that influence and charisma. So that's one thing. So now I want to talk a little bit about the fears I had to overcome, and they sort of also tie into a lot of these leadership, I guess, powers. And one of the fears I had was this fear of being wrong. So this fear of that prevented me from having expert power. You get the ability to experience expert power, you start to realize that I am so afraid of losing that, because if I can get 10 things right, and if I get one extra thing wrong, then suddenly I'm not seen as an expert anymore, and people assume that I'm gonna get more things wrong. So it is kind of really challenging, and being afraid starts to hold you back from saying things that you care about, from making decisions and speaking up, and being hesitant also makes you seem like you're not qualified to say something as well. So it becomes really, really challenging. So that was something that I had to worry about. And then the other thing that I thought was difficult in trying to achieve this, charisma and influence that will help you lead, was being afraid of being unlikable. And I see that happen a lot, particularly for women, because one of the feedback that I used to get, that I took a lot of pride in, was that people liked working with me because that I was very nice, and people enjoyed working with others like that. But on the other hand, I also had to be assertive about certain decisions that I wanted to impose on the team, and certain viewpoints that I wasn't willing to compromise on. And I think it was a shock to people when I did that, because they were like, oh, we thought you were this very nice and passive person. Suddenly you're speaking up. We're not used to it. And I think that this is a very difficult hurdle. And I've talked to people who realize that, you know what, I just stopped caring, and it's made my life so much better. So this is something that goes back to when building your brand and developing your sense of charisma. Don't be afraid to maybe challenge your brand a little bit. Okay, fear of conflict. I'm definitely guilty of being the type of person who would rather dodge an awkward situation or argument than fight it out. I've seen people in the open source community be very open to arguing things out, even nitpicky things. In the Python community, we are notorious for people who argue about tabs versus spaces, and to the extent where it's a lovable joke and it's totally okay. But I've also seen people with strong opinions about databases and who share that during lunchtime, and I'm just like, I just want to eat, and I don't want to accidentally offend you because I don't love this database as much as you do. It gets harder to call people out because sometimes those discussions could turn into disagreements that then I would lose or be seen as unlikable and aggressive, and there's no winning there. And if what I found useful in this instance was with coding, having conversations in GitHub and having conversations in public channels like public Slack meant that all of those conversations would be documented in a very public space. Not that people are well behaved in public spaces, as we know from being on the internet. But it also meant that next time, if you have that discussion again, you have something to refer back to things to think about. I know my title sort of also says, oh, how do you be a tech lead when you don't have a lot of power, or when you don't have the official job title? And that sort of brings to the question, what is a tech lead anyway? And it varies depending on where you are and what kind of company you're at. But I found it to be, basically, my story was that I had the opportunity to basically create my own job description. I was at a point where my managers gave me a lot of flexibility to pursue my own interests, and they gave me a lot of flexibility in what projects I worked on. And I had that opportunity to basically, instead of following checklists of things you should be doing to move in your career, just figure out what you want to do and go and do it. And I thought that was really difficult, actually. And as much as I thought getting a seat at the table and getting the opportunities that I wanted was challenging, once you do get those opportunities, being heard is a constant uphill battle. And you know, knowing knowing that you're doing the right thing and motivating yourself is also really hard. And sort of my story there was I had this opportunity to launch a complete re-platform of one of our big data solutions. And at the time, I was the only person left on the original team. Everyone else had moved on to bigger and better things. And then I had a lot of domain knowledge that I didn't know that other people didn't have. And I had a lot of expertise on the technical stack and the data science problems that we were trying to solve. So when I was put on a small team with these senior managers and engineers with years of experience, they quickly realized that I was the person who had the most knowledge to help finish the project. It took me a lot longer to realize that, and they would defer to me on certain decisions, and I would be like, I don't know, like maybe, here are my thoughts. Maybe like we'll do it this way. And then gradually, I think part of it was because I had this really wonderful team of senior folks. I got comfortable in saying, hey, I think that this is like the best solution for what we're trying to do. Here's my architecture diagram. Like, can you look it over and give me some feedback? And I think here's why I want to use this and this and this. And that was really fun, really. So I see someone as a tech lead as someone who is able to inspire the team and inspire the team to use new technologies that they might not have used in the past. Someone who influences what technologies we use based on the problems we have and be able to justify that X and Y is the best thing for the problem that we're solving, as opposed to saying, oh, we've always done it this way, therefore we should use this technology. Someone who signs off on, I'm missing a letter, I have a typo, that makes me feel bad. Who signs off on the architecture, so someone who's ultimately held accountable if this plan doesn't go into play, and that tends to be someone who also have a backup plan for if this idea doesn't play well. And someone who challenges others to learn and grow. I realized that as a junior tech lead, I couldn't tell people to go and do something and expect them to be motivated because, I couldn't reward them at the end. I mean, I couldn't really reward them at the end. I also wasn't their direct managers. So what I found really helpful for me was to sort of explain to people why what we're doing is so important, and to get them really excited about the work that we're doing. So for instance, we were starting to benchmark a performance of our database. And this is not that exciting in terms of, if you guys ever benchmark databases, it's kind of tedious. You just run a query, time it, run another query, time it, and test things. But the person I was working with had never done this task before, and it was a great growth opportunity for them. So I sort of was able to sit down with them and talk about, all their aspirations on becoming a great engineer. And like, yes, you're going to do such a fabulous job on this, and people are going to respect you so much, and it's going to help everyone, and you're going to demo it at the end, and it's going to be so fantastic. So being able to help others like learn and grow in their career when you can't directly give them a better pay afterwards was pretty empowering. All right. Oh, and someone who gives credit as opposed to taking credit. I see this happen quite often. It becomes really ambiguous in tech, who did what that made this thing work so much better. And for the most part, people shouldn't really care that much, especially with a lot of projects where a lot of code get refactored. So it becomes really unclear who did what feature. But I think that it's incredibly powerful as a tech lead to say, hey, this person changed our code in such a way that it ran X times faster. And to attribute credit where credit is due. Yep.
Share credit.
Yes.
Sharing instead of taking or giving.
Yes, that is totally true. Sharing credit. It's like, oh, I couldn't have done this without help from a fellow teammate. All right. What didn't work well for me? Not speaking up or waiting too long to speak up. Sometimes I would realize after a meeting that, oh, No, I totally didn't agree to any of the things that we decided in this meeting. And that was really ineffective for my team because that meant that we would have to have a second meeting to go over the concerns that I realized I now had. So speaking up is usually the best thing for everyone. Giving up on the position too early. Sometimes it's hard to know like when to give up. Sometimes I feel like if you draw something out too much, then it just gets really annoying. But sometimes it is worth sticking out your ideas, and I tend to give up too early. As in, if 2 or 3 minutes into an argument, I know I'm losing. It's like forget it. So not giving up too early is very important. So connection power. I found that leveraging other people's influence and power to fight your own battles, it seems to work really well. It looks like it's working really well. But ultimately, it's not an effective form of leadership. I used to like have one senior manager present all my ideas at meetings because I know that if he says them, people will love it, and I don't have to sit through point number 2 and have a debate about everything. But then I realized that this was not sustainable, and I just had to endure I have to be able to present my ideas and build up that expert power, and eventually it gets a lot easier itself. What did work well? Revisiting topics. There's apparently no such thing as a final decision. I think this varies at different companies too, but people are always open to restructuring and re-implementing or rethinking and revisiting an idea. So what happened, I think, for a lot for me when I was in innovation lab was that sometimes our ideas were too out there or too early. And then, for instance, we would start off with something cool, and then someone was come in and say, that's a ridiculous idea. And then 2 years later, it's suddenly a great idea. So be open to revisiting ideas or topics. Being a good listener. So a really common problem on my team that was really sad was that people would interrupt each other before they finish their thoughts, or anticipate that they can finish someone's ideas and cut them off and say their ideas and then have them say that wasn't what I was going to say, but good point. And it made it really hard to hear out everyone's ideas. And I found it effective to, one, call someone out for interrupting another person because that's just rude, and try to get the team to be out of this habit and try to get everyone to be a good listener. And 3, leaving work at the office, or rather leaving your baggage at the office, because it is not, if you had a frustrated meeting, it's not worth taking that outside of that room. All right, and I can't be at an Anita Borg Institute event without a quote from Grace Hopper. So to inspire you guys, she said, "A ship in port is safe, but that's not what a ship is built for." So things to think about, and yay, you can do it. It doesn't matter what level you are, or it's worth practicing influencing people. I spent a lot of time trying to convince my team to use certain technologies because I fundamentally believed that it would make our lives easier. And then one day I just observed this senior engineering manager come in and say, "Guys, we're using Docker." And that was the end of that discussion, and nobody questioned it. And I was like, damn, where can I get that power? I want to be able to do that. Something that this very junior Android developer that I was talking to, I was like, you should totally start practicing influencing your team, even though you might not care so much about certain technologies yet because you haven't worked in a workforce. Full caveat, I am not an Android developer, but I have programmed in Java, and I didn't particularly like it. And now Android has an official new language called Kotlin. So I was like, you should practice your ability to influence people and sell your team to using Kotlin instead of Java. It's cleaner than Java. It has no safety at compile time. It's more modern. You should be the one to bring it to your team, even though you're the most junior. And they will thank you once they get used to life without having to deal with no pointer exceptions all the time. And it'll be awesome. So always go about, practicing your ability to influence. And then, and that's the end of my talk. I referenced Nicole Lipkin's book on what keeps leaders up at night. That's where the 7 types of power come from. And I also read this article from the Harvard Business Review when I first put together this talk. And yeah, this is my contact information. I also organize for Women Who Code New York City, so come find me and other women who code at our meetup events. Thank you guys so much for coming.